It's so good to have Warren Bird with me today. And Warren and I were just chatting because we rarely have these conversations face to face unless we're at a conference. So this is highly unusual, Warren.
Great to talk with you, Tony. I've watched many of your Skype interviews, your video interviews. I always learn from them, and hopefully this won't be the exception for others who watch them.
Well, in case you don't know Warren, he's with the Leadership Network and really working behind the scenes on many projects that the Leadership Network has offered for churches, primarily focusing on larger churches. In fact, Warren, that's the reason why I wanted to connect with you today, because just in the last several days, the Leadership Network, with your help, has just released a new report looking at the economic outlook of larger churches. And before we talk specifically about the contents of the report, can you tell me a little bit about the churches that you researched?
Okay, well, the most important thing I can say is anybody can download this free at leadnet.org/salary, singular, and all of our salary stuff is available. Economic outlook, salary reports, and as you say, focuses on larger churches. We, as we do for many things, we send emails to a number of churches that have worked with us. They tend to be the larger ones. There are only 1,600 megachurches, 2,000 and higher in the United States. And then we'll put it on our blog and other places, and oftentimes you'll help publicize something on your great blog, which I read regularly. And so all sizes of churches apply. And while then we give an executive summary to everybody who participates, and we always do that for our surveys. But the main thing in our report that I do is I say, okay, as a church increases in size, what changes? You know, does per capita giving go up or go down? Does salary as a percent of budget go up, go down? How does it change with church size?
And without giving away all the details, let me ask you first, Warren. Were there any personal surprises for you, or did the research just kind of confirm what you were thinking in the back of your mind?
Well, there were a lot of affirming things that I saw, like the rise in electronic giving. We all suspected that, but all large churches do electronic giving at some level.
Mm-hmm.
But then we not only asked, do you do it? We asked, what percent of your offerings come in? And my wife and I, we do our giving that way. The offering plate passes by each week, and we just smile and pray. Hopefully don't feel awkward. But a sizable number. We have a little graph that show some churches that a large amount of their giving comes electronically.
And I found it interesting that it seems, anyways, the larger the church gets, the healthier they have been, especially through the economic downturn that we're just coming out of.
Well, that's the banner finding of the whole report. Everybody was affected by the recession, and certainly those towns, Detroit, Las Vegas, and all that were hardest hit as towns. Their people were hardest hit, and the churches were as well. But as a whole, large churches tightened their belts immediately back in '08 when the recession hit, and have done very well compared to everybody else. In part, it's because such a large number of large churches are growing, and with added growth, you have, to some degree, whether a little or a lot, more giving, which then gives you more margin. But also, like I just attended a workshop presented by the Evangelical Council for Financial Accountability, who said, these were the bad things churches did during recessions. These were the smart things. And I watched and I thought, of the large churches I've talked with, very few, waited to respond and all the negative things. And many of them took wise, proactive action. Okay, let's tighten the belts now. Let's come up with an ideal budget and an actual budget, with kind of a bonus. Should extra money come in, we'll spend it so we don't get in trouble counting on something because we don't know which way the economy is going to go.
Okay, Warren, you teased it. So I'm curious now, because we can learn from mistakes. What were some of the bad things that churches did during that downturn?
Well, they waited too long to react.
Okay.
They didn't address the problem. Many of them said, well, we need to just emphasize you need to give more, or we need to give more visibility to stewardship, instead of immediately kicking in and saying, no, we need to help our people get financially free. We need to help our people work through what this recession means.
Mm-hmm. And interesting, you kind of just said it in passing, but I remember 12, 15 years ago when I was first getting connected into church ministry, there was discussion back then that mega churches were on the decline, that we were going to see the end of the number of large churches in our country. But your research is showing the direct opposite, isn't it?
Just the opposite. That's probably the biggest myth out there, that the mega church is over. In fact, last year I visited 105 churches, all of whom the pastor was under age 40 and the attendance was 2,000 and higher. And a lot of people said, where did you find, 105 mega churches with young pastors and correspondingly young audiences? And I'm like, I had far more than that to choose from.
Yeah. Yes, that's true. All right, so in addition to talking about some of the economic conditions and just overall financial condition of the churches, in this report you talk a little bit about staffing and budgeting for staffing, and this you have other reports that get specifics on salaries of different positions. But can you share some of the findings related to staffing and their salaries and so on through this particular report, Warren?
Yeah, the nice thing is Leadership Network has for years done staffing reports, which gives us kind of a longitudinal perspective. And again, it's leadnet.org/salary, singular, to you can look at several years' worth. But what we actually did, because, I mean, all these reports are very confidential, but I and a trusted colleague, we took, okay, who responded in 2012? Did any of those same churches respond in 2010? Did any of those same churches respond in '08? So we could do, and fortunately we had a sizable number that did, because we got several hundred responses each time, thanks to people like you helping publicize our stuff. So we were able to say, okay, from 2010 to 2012, salaries, senior level salaries in large churches are going up. From '08 to 2010, they remained flat. So the 2010 to 2012 jump was 2% a year. And then we also asked, okay, for 2013 or your next budget year, which, by the way, one of the things we asked churches was, how do you do your budgets? And I assumed, this was a minor surprise, that the majority would have done a calendar year or a fiscal year that's July to June. And that's only about a third for the first, a third for the second, and the others were, March 15 to, just, well, it could be in keeping with their church annual meeting, who knows why. But anyway, we asked, on your next budget cycle, are you going to give increases? And the answer was yes, for larger churches, a modest amount. We're going to increase staff, and we're going to give raises. 2 to 3% was the majority answer for raises.
Yeah, and you probably get this question all the time, Warren. I know it's one of the most frequent questions I get. Churches of any size are kind of looking for that benchmark of how much of their overall budget should they be investing in staff, and I'm assuming this would include salaries and benefits. Any guidance you can give church leaders based on what you've seen?
Yeah, several things. First, you mentioned benefits. That's not a minor amount. That's a third to a half. And in fact, as we point out in our report, the rate of benefit growth across the country, and we think correspondingly in churches, has increased faster than the rate of base pay. So we're looking at total pay package, total staffing costs. And another little twist in it is, the larger the church, the more outsourcing they're doing of janitorial service and this and that. So we have to ask people, okay, let's make sure we're counting apples and apples, that you're really counting all your staffing costs. That said, and then the other piece is, are we looking at that as a ratio of your general budget or of all your funds, your building fund, your missions fund, and all for those churches, the majority of which do have multiple funds. So taking the general fund, and all staffing costs. Interestingly, mega churches end up somewhere between 40 and 50%, and that's pretty common for all sizes of churches.
Yes.
The one exception being church plants, where often they put a heavy amount of money into staffing in their early years.
Mm-hmm.
They don't have building cost or rental cost or minimal and so forth. So we did not find that there's kind of an economy of scale with the percent of your budget that goes to staffing costs on any level until about 10,000. And at that point, and we only had a couple dozen churches over 10,000. So were they flukes? Were they happen to be the ones that participated in our survey? But we think we see a greater efficiency there, and we think more and more churches in the economy are asking, hey, how can we more strategically use our volunteers? How can we do things to make sure that our staffing costs are really what we want? Now, that said, there is no right or wrong. The Bible doesn't talk about, this percentage of your church budget should go to hiring anyone. So this is just the norm here in North America.
Yeah. Now, in the past, Warren, you've done a little bit of research on churches that are really trying to be intentional about lowering staffing costs. Are you seeing any further trends with that or not?
Well, I'm hearing people talk about it, but I don't want to always assume that lower staffing costs is the biblical answer and the right answer, because there are some churches that staff for growth at strategic times. Mm-hmm. Yeah, let me give you just a few examples. A church that has a heavy ministry to people with disabilities mm-hmm. is going to, by definition, need a higher staffing muscle than other kinds of ministries. So I just want to emphasize the best benchmark is against yourself as a church and against your mission as a church. Now, that said, if you're running 70%, 65%, 60%, chances are you need to really study that carefully. Mm-hmm. And chances are that's occurred because perhaps one common scenario is your attendance has declined, you haven't trimmed the staff, and therefore the staffing portion of the budget becomes a bigger and bigger piece of the pie.
Right. Well, Warren, as always, you provide some interesting insights into what's happening behind the scenes in churches across America. So let me this is maybe a tough question for you, but of course, most of the research that the Leadership Network is doing is related to larger churches. I have church leaders of every size that are following the content on my site. Are there still?
I attend a church of 150 where I'm an elder, and we use Leadership Network stuff to help us.
Well, that's precisely the point I was going to ask is, are there still some principles that would apply for the smaller churches?
Absolutely. Every church can learn from other churches, and there's a lot of stuff that is just size specific to the story, but you can glean from it. And not that God is calling every church to be a large church, but God is calling every church, I believe, to make more and better disciples, whatever format that comes in. And so gleaning ideas from churches that are on growth curves, whether it's growing from 200 to 400 or 4,000 to 8,000, is always, I think, a wise thing to investigate.
That's very good. Okay, again, Warren, thank you for sharing your wisdom. This report, you can find it at leadnet.org/salary, singular.
Correct. And to follow me, it's at Warren Bird on Twitter, and to get a newsletter that we write that updates kind of trends and information like this, it's leadnet.org/update. And you
very
give
good.
Your email address and you're in, along with about 55,000 other people.
Very good, Warren. We can't pack it all into one conversation, so do you promise sometime in the future we can talk again?
Tony, I always enjoy my time with you. You are on the fronting edge. Your blog is one that I follow regularly, and your tweets, and I'm always learning from you. And my motto is never be the smartest person in the room or closest to it. So when you're in the room, I feel better.
Well, I don't know about that. Thanks a lot, Warren, and we'll connect again sometime in the future.
Great. Thank you, Tony. Take care.